Publishing or migrating a legacy SFM dictionary is really an exercise in interpreting a set of documents as if they were a set of database records. Remember that these SFM files were created with a particular kind of output in mind, on paper, and each record is really just a mini document. Newer software like Flex lets you focus first on what the data is rather than on how it's published. But transitioning from an older format, which is really a loose tree format, into a tight tree format is inherently tricky. Users often treat field markers much like styles or formatting in Word, and if a marker is empty, they often leave it out entirely, even if it's a structural marker. So the main task in bringing these lexicons into the modern era is to make all of their fields legal and unambiguous according to a standard structure. The Flex importer can flag some field ordering issues, if you ask it to, but Solid is the best way really to do this kind of checking. It's usually too difficult to try to do cleanup and import all in one step, especially when there needs to be some back and forth work between the linguist and the migration specialist. Much of the work involved has to do with making ambiguous data unambiguous. Here we have two gloss fields in English that are next to each other, sort of, and it's not clear whether they are sense 1 of 2 senses, or whether they are senses 1 and 2 of 3 senses. If we can make all of the senses begin in a consistent way, then we have a better chance of doing a clean import. Remember that this data has been entered as a flat text file, and so any field might really end up anywhere. For example, here's a note field, but what does it apply to? There are actually 4 interpretations here that Flex can import. It might apply to the entry as a whole, it might apply to the last subentry, to the last sense, or to the last example. And in order to import these, we would need to use separate markers for each one of those, such as NTLX, NTSE, NT, which is the default mapping Flex would use, or NTRF to apply to an example. It's also a good idea to move a field up so that it's very obvious what it can apply to and what it cannot. And in some cases this is necessary. For example, with a variant field, it has to be moved. You cannot simply rename the marker. When doing Flex imports, this is just some of the lore that needs to be learned. Another example of tight and loose formats is link fields. A link in SFM is just a piece of text that may or may not actually match a target record that exists. Or maybe it did exist once, but then was deleted, or maybe the spelling was changed and so it no longer matches, or maybe the numbers of a homograph or a sense were changed, and so the link now points to the wrong object. So it's important to fix links prior to any electronic publication, and prior to Flex import if you don't want a lot of cleanup work afterwards. Now Toolbox can't automatically preserve links when you're changing numbering and spellings, and its after-the-fact checking is really very simplistic. It only works for single-word links. It doesn't work for phrases, it doesn't work for homographs, nor for specific senses. Again, a plain text link might not be a real link at all, and the real links that Flex has are always double-ended. If you delete either entry, the link will be deleted as well, or if you change the spelling or numbering of one, the link will still be preserved. So there are many inherent difficulties involved in migrating a legacy dictionary to Flex, even given a perfect importer, especially if the lexicon has been edited by many people over many years. Again, doing it all in one step is not likely to work, so a good import into Flex is typically a process of doing multiple cleanup steps in between multiple test imports. So the primary hindrance to data migration is actually cleaning up the SFM. This is maybe 80% of the work. Also, although the Flex importer does a lot well, it does have quirks and flaws, and working around those is a large chunk of the other 20%, which is the import and the post-processing. An import specialist has to work using multiple mindsets. Within Flex, the amount of variation in structure is pretty limited and standardized, but within SFM, every lexicon is unique, even though it may be generally following a standard. Also, we have multiple standards. MDF is the most popular and best supported, the Philippines branch of SIL has its format, the Mexico branch has its own format, and so on. And again, there's nothing actually enforcing these standards other than users reading documentation. This is why Solid exists. Solid is a tool that lets you specify and then enforce certain structural rules on SFM lexicon files. Be aware that some of the structures that are allowed do not map directly to anything in Flex. For example, MDF has LF, LV, LE bundles. The first two fields import fine, but the LE does not, because it is a gloss on a lexical relation, and Flex doesn't have a specific field for glossing lexical relations. The Philippine branch has an OI field, which means inflected form, and Flex lexicons typically store that kind of information in the text and words area. Here is an example of 3 of the mindsets involved in our organization. Some markers are fairly comparable, like LX and PS. Others are quite different. DT means date in MDF, but it means definition Tagalog in PLB. When doing cleanup and migration of SFM files, there are various tools that can help. Toolbox itself can be used for checking simple links, for doing replace all within a particular language, and it can also be made to kind of display the structure of the fields. Solid is the main tool for analyzing and manually fixing SFM files, and it also has some bulk fixing tools. For users who are staying in Toolbox, consider validating the data periodically using Solid. Text editors such as Notepad++, Eclipse, EditPad Pro, etc. that can use regular expressions can be very good at doing bulk fixes, although you need to be careful not to accidentally delete data. Some scripts and CC tables are already available to be used or to be tweaked and used, and these can be very useful for more complex kinds of analysis and fixes. The Flex importer itself is the final word as to what will happen if you're migrating into Flex. The importer is fault-tolerant and helpful, but it's also quirky, partly because it's fault-tolerant. Pathway and Webinary are the final word on what the publication will look like. As you can see, there are many skills needed to do a good, clean data migration, and this is typically only done once per project. A lexicon migration specialist needs to know both Flex and the source SFM that is being migrated from, and the quirks of the features or tools that are being used, and to know the user's goals so that if there are any mismatches, they are acceptable to the linguist. The migration specialist also often serves as a lexicography consultant, so it is probably not worth learning these skills just to use them once, and it's not a very good do-it-yourself project for the linguist. This is not to say that the linguist doesn't need to be involved. Although some ambiguities are fairly easy to figure out for a human, others may require input from the original linguist to clarify what they meant, such as that note field we looked at earlier. If the linguist is unavailable, then spending extra time looking through and analyzing a lexicon's patterns, while looking at the meanings and the definitions as well, often works. But whenever possible, it's best for the linguist and specialist to meet. Using Skype with screen sharing works well. It's generally safer and more efficient for the specialist to do most of the fixing and editing, but there is some back and forth, in cases where it's better for the linguist to fix certain entries or patterns. Or sometimes the linguist just needs to look at a list of values and indicate what's the same and what's different. This is especially true for part of speech or lexical relations, where small variations may have been accidental. Let's take a closer look at how Solid works. In the top left pane, you have a list of settings describing each of the markers and where they are allowed to occur, that is, the tree structure. In the lower left, you have a list of errors or possible errors and warnings that Solid has detected in the file. These function as filters, filtering down the list of records to just the affected ones. And on the right side is a set of records displayed one at a time that are in the currently selected filter. Let's take a look at 3 markers that Solid has flagged as being unlicensed in their current locations. The first one is SO, and it is allowed to occur under a sense, but it is occurring after a VA field which is only allowed to occur under LX or SE, so it has kicked us out a level in the tree structure, and there is no longer a sense available for SO and TH to occur under. The solution is to move the VA field up to where it belongs, and then the sense fields are uninterrupted. The other issue here is with the example. RF can occur under SN, but there isn't one there, so the solution here is to insert an SN. There have been a lot of changes to Solid in the past year, with well over 100 issues closed out in the issue tracker. Here's a lightning summary. It should now be safe for ordinary linguists to use Solid for editing their data. All known data-damaging bugs have been squashed, and it's now possible to delete a record or insert a new LX field without Solid crashing or deleting data. Those who are still using Toolbox can start using Solid to unlearn bad habits and to start cleaning up their data. It is now possible to launch Solid more easily, either by manually adding it to your Send To menu and sending your lexicon files there, or by associating the .solid or the .db extension with Solid and then double-clicking. It also takes fewer clicks now to change multiple settings because the settings dialog can stay open as you go through changing settings for different markers. More is also displayed in the settings columns so you can quickly refer to them or compare them across markers. It's now easier to use click and drag to move lines up and down, and opening files takes about 1/7 the amount of time that it did before, and it's more keyboard friendly, especially for find replace. Encoding mistakes can lead to frustrating data corruption issues, so Solid now tries to help you choose the right encoding when you first open a file. And if you choose different settings for different fields, it will warn you each time you open the file that you have mixed encodings. Once you have unified all of your encodings, then there's a menu item now to change everything over in one click, or to change it back to legacy with one click. Color coding for warnings concerning encodings has also been shifted over onto the data field itself, reserving the color coding on markers for structural errors. Solid now comes with a menu system, which includes a help menu, and the manual now ships with Solid. The main templates provided for MDF and PLB now include descriptions, and you can edit those descriptions and add your own to your own custom fields. There is now an option for saving a copy of what is currently in memory, and it will save both files, the lexicon and the .solid settings. This is primarily useful for making a backup right before doing a bulk fix. There is also the option to include indentation, inferred markers, and closing markers in the file that is saved. This may be useful if using another tool to do your bulk fixes, and it is conceptually similar to saving the file as XML with the structure included, and it can be converted into a rough XML using a couple of replace all operations in your favorite text editor. The Find Replace dialog has been rebuilt and now includes regular expression support, and previews so you can look before you leap, and even double regexes so that you can limit the context using one regex and then do the replace with the second regex. Be aware though that there's still no Find Replace All, though you can hold down the button, and there's no real undo yet other than what is built into the currently displayed text box. The Fix menu now includes some common Find Replace operations, each of which launches the Find Replace dialog with a different set of settings and instructions.